What is up, guys? Today I'd love to share with you a simple and aggressive opening for black against the queen's pawn move, pawn to d4, the queen's gambit. I recommend that you go for knight to f6 and after c4, which is the main move. Of course, some people go for the London system, but that is a minority. The main move is c4, so let's talk about that today. And then you strike in the center with the move pawn to c5. I played this variation a lot up to the level of FIDE Master, and it served me really well. Now, after c5, you put pressure onto them straight away. The main move for white is to push the pawn forward. We'll talk about that. I'll share with you a number of games played by me against Magnus Carlsen's coach, and the game played by Carlsen himself, so we're gonna have fun there. But before we dive into this, let me address real quick what are the alternatives. What if white simply grabs your pawn on c5? Can they win a pawn? The answer is not really, because you can play pawn e6 and then you get this pawn back straight on the next move while developing your bishop and having a great position. They cannot hold on to this pawn by going pawn to b4, because although it looks solid temporarily, but you just play pawn a5, undermine it, and this whole construction is very fragile. Let's say if they go bishop d2, the most played move, the very strong response for black is knight to e4. You could take on b4, just splitting out the pawns is good enough, but knight e4 is even stronger. And now, not only the fact that you're putting pressure right here, the main thing is you are preparing this nasty move queen to f6 with so many threats. You attack the rook, you threaten queen takes f2 checkmate, and you still are just threatening to split up their pawns and get them back, but fundamentally they are already lost because they can't hold on to all these weaknesses. If initially they take on c5, but after e6 they're not trying to hold on to this pawn and they just develop, which is what they do most of the time, there's also a very interesting variation that follows. You get this pawn back and develop your bishop to an active square. That's already nice. Moreover, on the next move you're going to play pawn d5, and now actually you are the one occupying the center and you're threatening to either take or push. They usually trade on d5. Good for you once again, because now you're able to open up this light square bishop, which is cool. Also, they don't feel the danger at this point. They go bishop g5 here mostly, thinking that they're the one attacking, but you play pawn d4 and it turns out that it's all the opposite. Now they have to defend somehow this knight. And as they go knight e4, again, still believing that everything is cool, they're attacking, they're taking advantage of the pin, but there's a nice trick that you can take advantage of. You play knight takes e4, letting them grab your queen, because after that, you've got this really strong counter strike, bishop b4 check, and it turns out that the king is suffocated. White has to go knight to d2, but then you take it, and finally white has to give up their own queen to save the king. And now at the end of this line, we're simply up a knight in an endgame, and it's a very simple position, so hopefully you're gonna win from here. Another cool bonus for black is that pretty much the same variation can occur from another move order. In this position, after you've just played pawn to c5, strangely enough, the second most played move by white is knight to c3. They're just playing their standard queen's gambit move, irrelevant of what you're doing here. And knight c3 is certainly not the right move, because now after the exchange on d4, not only you destroy their center, but after knight to c6, you now gain an extra tempo for your development. Now the queen has to move, and now after pawn e6 and pawn to d5, we actually get something very similar to what we have just seen, and it usually actually goes into the same line. They go bishop g5, pinning your knight, you go d4, they think, oh, this pin is really cool, let me go knight e4 and attack him, but then you sack the queen, and then you go bishop b4, and you win the game just like we have seen before. Moving on to the main line, let me first show you the nastiest trap that your opponents may use against you. The main line is pawn to d5, where white grabs the center, and then you play pawn b5. Now the move that looks a bit paradoxical at first looks like you're really desperate to sacrifice one of your pawns, but in reality you want to take over the initiative and open up some files for your development. You then play pawn to a6, and now the main line is an exchange on a6. To this, black usually recaptures with their bishop. However, white's got this tricky move knight to c3, and after you take, they don't recapture. Then after you go bishop a6, that would probably transpose into the main line once again. However, instead of that, white can actually play pawn e4, which is a trickier option. Now it looks like you can play b4, chase this knight away, and after it goes right here to b5, black can then seemingly grab this undefended pawn on e4. However, it was a trick. By the way, what I'm sharing with you right now is my game. I'm playing black against Dreev, who is a grandmaster, and of course he knew all this stuff, but I knew it as well. So he played queen we didn't went for this variation. Queen e2 is what white wants, attacking this knight, and after it goes, there is this nasty checkmate knight to d6, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn is pinned. But lucky for me, I was aware of this, therefore I did not capture this pawn on e4, instead I played pawn d6. And here white follows up with bishop f4, kinda insisting on the same idea. Now as black takes on e4, white can still play queen e2 with a very similar purpose. They're hitting the knight, and as the knight goes, white is ready to play knight takes d6 nevertheless. Now normally, in this position, black would wish to just recapture with their queen, however, it's no longer possible because of this bishop from d6, from f4, which guards the knight on d6, which means that black would have to play this awkward move king to d7, and now white obviously wins the game. By the way, let this be a puzzle of the day. It is white to play and win, and of course white's got a great position, but your task is to find the quickest way to win for white, and if you can find it, please write it down in comments below. Lucky for me, I knew the right move, and the move is pawn g5, and that counter strike helps black to stay in the game. Moreover, black is actually having a great position here. Now after g5, we say, hey, if you want to take this knight, go ahead, we're gonna take the bishop. And this exchange is actually really great for black, because at the end of the line, we have this absolutely monstrous bishop on g7, which puts the pressure, and our rook from a8 is also active from its original square, and black's got a terrific position here. Probably black is already winning. Now, white, of course, aware of this as well, and he did not went for this variation. In the actual game, white played bishop c1. Now this knight still needs to go, so knight goes to f6, bishop takes g5, and bishop to g7. Black is still down a pawn, however, white's position is a little bit awkward. Now this pawn on d5 is possibly hanging, the queen on e2 is a little bit awkward, and all in all, black is certainly having some compensation. I mean, black is probably having a really great position here. White played pawn g3 because they need to develop their bishop somehow, and after this I realized that this knight on b5 has nowhere to go. The pawns are taking away all the squares where the knight could possibly go to, and I played rook to a5, trying to put pressure to the knight. White realized the same thing, he went pawn a4, trying to solidify the knight. Now we can take en passant, and white recaptures, and after this I just castled. Maybe I could play bishop a6 straight away, I don't know, it was a blitz game, so I chose also an easier move to play. And here white played bishop g2, which is a continuation of their idea, development of the bishop, and they saved this pawn on d5. However, after bishop a6, it turns out that this knight on b5 is actually lost, even though theoretically it now has some squares where it could go to, but due to this pin, it can't go, and black is attacking it twice. White could trade rooks, but that doesn't change the situation. After that, it's all the same thing. We're attacking this knight twice, and white just resigned. The next game really illustrates a lot of typical attacking patterns of black here. White went for the main line, pawn takes, pawn a6, and white accepts this pawn as well. Now, at this point, black can certainly just recapture, and that is a perfectly fine move to play. From here, the bishop is very active, putting long-term pressure down this diagonal. If white ever moves his e-pawn forward, we would be able to trade off bishops, forcing his king to move and therefore to stay in the center of the board, which is nice for us. However, it is considered a little more sophisticated to start by going pawn g6, so that later on we can decide how we wish to get this pawn back, whether it's by the bishop or by the knight, or sometimes want to throw the queen out first. This is more of a nuance, it's not so critical. Anyway, GMs often play g6 first, and white played knight c3, bishop g7. The bishop, although is not looking very active right now, but in reality it is a terrific piece, and it's going to be putting long-term pressure throughout this diagonal. Plus, let's notice that we have these semi-open files on the queen side, and we're going to have our rooks there probably in the future, and that is our main long-term plan, to put pressure down the queen side. Anyway, white plays knight f3, black castles, white goes pawn e4, so far so good, both sides develop, and here black used another common attacking idea in the Benko Gambit, the move queen a5, which pins the knight, and therefore creates a threat of knight takes e4, due to the fact that this knight is pinned and won't be able to recapture. Therefore white played bishop d2, trying to neutralize the pin. But now after bishop takes a6, black realized another interesting thing. The bishop from a6 controls this diagonal, making it impossible for white to castle. And even if white were to trade bishops, black recaptures with a queen, keeping the same situation, and white is still having a hard time castling. Therefore in the game, instead of this, white played bishop to e2, trying to castle on the next move. However, black still keeps attacking. He goes queen b4, this time with a double attack to the pawn on b2, as well as the pawn on e4. White decided to trade off bishops, but now black brings their knight into play, and white still needs to guard his pawns. He played queen c2. It's interesting how white keeps playing seemingly logical and very natural looking moves, but black has managed to always create some interesting threats, and white is always in trouble. Here black played queen c4, still cutting off the king, and once again not letting white a castle. White thought for himself, wait a second, I can just go b3 and kick this queen away, but black said, yeah, wait a second, and knight to b4 is another cool counterblow. This time black is countering the queen, and white has to move it away. If white were to take this queen on c4, that would actually be a big blunder, because then after knight takes c2, that would be a fork, and funnily enough, black would manage to win this rook twice, because now after king to e2, not only we grab the rook once, but on the next move we have another tactical shot, knight takes e4, taking advantage of this bishop, putting pressure to the knight. And on the next move we're winning the second rook on a1 in a row, plus our own rook is very active along the a file, and it's completely desperate for white here. In the actual game, white just moved the queen away, queen goes back to b1, and now black needs to save their own queen, so queen went to a6, and now we're still controlling this diagonal, white still can castle, plus we're threatening knight to d3 check. And also in the Benko Gambit, it's very common for black to wish for their knight to be landing to this square, regardless of whether the white's king is in the middle of the board or not, because even if the king is castled, the knight on d3 would be a monstrous piece anyway. White played pawn a4, he's trying to go knight b5 and close the diagonal for the queen. Here black realized another common maneuver, knight g4. Again, very common stuff, and in the Benko Gambit you often wish to play that move because it opens up the bishop, and you also reposition the knight to a nice central square on e5. White continued with his plan, he played knight to b5, trying to block the diagonal and to finally castle. However, black responded with queen takes b5. It's absolutely interesting how black always finds these resourceful ideas to maintain his attack, and white just resigned because after pawn takes and rook takes a1, our sniper bishop is supporting our attack, and due to this pin, white has to give up their queen. Therefore, if we trade off, black will be up a knight in an endgame, and white just resigned. In the next game, I'm still playing black against Magnus Carlsen's coach, Simen Agdestein, who is, by the way, a very talented person. He used to play for the Norway national football team, and it's rare to be a GM and a great football player. Anyway, white captures on a6, I went pawn g6. As we discussed earlier, black can take this pawn back anytime, and therefore pawn g6 is considered a little more sophisticated, although it's not that critical. White played pawn b3. He anticipates black to be putting pressure along this diagonal, and therefore he wants to neutralize it by putting his own bishop to the same diagonal. Although it has pros, it has cons as well, because it's a little bit slow. And because black finalizes their development quicker, they can also begin their attack quicker. Now black castles, white goes pawn g3, aiming to fianchetto the second bishop as well. And in this variation, it's actually beneficial for black to capture this pawn by their knight, and we'll see why in a second. White solidified his queenside, and now it's not as easy for black to attack there. However, now white is a little bit slow, and black wants to shift his attack to the middle of the board. After bishop g2 and bishop b7, white is already feeling some pressure to this pawn. Right now it is defended, but for example on the next move, black is threatening to capitalize on this pin, go pawn e6, and then white will already feel some trouble. Anyway, for now white goes knight h3, he wants to reposition the knight right here and also to overprotect the center. But now after knight to b4, that is a very unusual fork to both pawns, and white is actually have to lose one of them. He decided to keep the central pawn, but now after rook takes a2, black successfully gets his sacrificed pawn back. And it's also nice that our rook is very active from its starting position. After an exchange of rooks, white castles, and here I played queen a8, trying to increase the pressure along this diagonal and still put pressure to this pawn. Black is also ready to play knight b4, bring the knight back into play and provide even more pressure to this pawn. White decided to just play d6 and trade it off, but now after this exchange, white captures, now we trade off bishops, and white overlooked that there was a move knight to e4, and he actually just resigned because it turned out that the queen is attacked, but also it's a discovered attack to the bishop, therefore white will have to lose one of these pieces. probably bishop. It was a blitz game, so even GMs can overlook stuff. Anyway, it goes to show how tricky it is for black and how it is interesting that you can always create these little threats and keep white under pressure, and sooner or later they're quite likely to blunder something. By the way, if you want to learn how to do that stuff yourself, how to play in this attacking style yourself, I've got a free masterclass that you can access by clicking the link below the video in the description, and there I share with you how you can do that, how I do that by playing, and how you can replicate the same ideas. And this time it's the game of Magnus Carlsen playing black against Boris Gelfand, who is also a very strong opponent. He played the World Championship match against Anand back in the day, and he was one of the top players for decades. Anyway, initially it was all the standard stuff, both sides just develop, e4, black castles. It's quite common for black to play d6, because it's part of their plan anyway, part of their setup, but also the pawn from d6 would control this square, not allowing white to push their pawn forward. But having said that, black does not have a big reason to worry about this move, and white did not play it in the actual game, because if they do so, they overextend their pawns, and after that they have a hard time defending them, and their center will probably be undermined and will collapse anyway. Therefore, in the game, white simply continued their development. Black played queen a5, the idea that we have seen before, pinning the knight, threatening knight takes e4, and therefore white just played bishop d3, trying to guard this pawn. Certainly white expected a normal game of chess. He thought he's gonna castle and play a normal chess game. However, Carlsen came up with a very creative move. Knight takes d5, comes out of nowhere, and white is strangely enough in trouble. Now this pony is in big trouble. Now black teams up against it, and somehow it cannot be defended. White took on d5, but now bishop takes c3 check, and after this trade, what helps black to get the advantage right here is that we're double attacking the king and the rook. White would normally wish to cover with the bishop, but in this particular case, that would allow black to capture this bishop on d3, which is no longer guarded by the queen. And after that, he's just attacking everything. White's got a bunch of weaknesses, he still can't castle, bishop takes a6 is coming, and white's position falls apart. Therefore, Gelfand decided to sacrifice the rook but to keep some attacking chances, and after queen takes a1, white is down material. However, he has some counter-attacking ideas, therefore Carlsen still needs to be careful. Anyway, initially he plays the standard move, bishop takes a6, white plays bishop b2, attacking the queen. Queen captures the pawn, rook a1 hits the queen again, queen to b3, this time black is putting pressure to this bishop, and certainly white does not want to just trade off everything along, the a file, because then he'll be just down material with no hope. Therefore, he instead played bishop e4, maybe hoping for some d6 stuff and counterattack, but of course it's very easy to shut it down by going pawn d6. That's how black normally finalizes their development in the Benko Gambit. They go pawn d6, knight to d7, and after that their development is complete. Now, at this point, white would wish to play queen h6, creating some checkmating threats, but he can't do that because the queen needs to guard this bishop on b2, or else it will be captured. Therefore, white decided to play rook b1 first, preparing queen h6 on the next move. And at this point, Carlsen came up with a very tricky idea. He played pawn f6, wanting to close this diagonal. However, at first that looks like a blunder, and perhaps white player thought that it was a blunder because bishop takes f6 is this counter attack of the queen, and white managed to grab this juicy pawn on f6. However, Carlsen prepared queen c4, which is a counter attack, and now it turns out that both bishops of white are attacked and he can't save both of them. So Carlsen tricked Gelfand actually. And now white decided to retreat with the bishop, queen takes c4. This time white needs to guard this rook on b1, so he still has no time to play queen h6 himself. He's got to guard the rook. He played rook to e1, but now queen to d3, and somehow white never could create any significant threats. He actually traded queens, but of course that just leads to a losing endgame. White would really wish to play queen h6, but now after rook to f7 and knight to g5, for a second it feels like white created some interesting threats, putting pressure all around. However, Carlsen here prepared the move queen d2, which is a complete upset, and black literally attacks everything that white has. The rook, the bishop, queen takes f2 is coming, and he's pinning the knight along this diagonal. Like, it's absurd, but white is really attacked from every angle possible, and it's complete devastation. Today we've been talking about an aggressive way for black to meet the queen's pawn move, but if you want to know an aggressive way to counter the king's pawn move, pawn to e4, feel free to check out this video right here. If you want to know how to become a strong attacking player yourself, head to the free masterclass by clicking the link up there and keep crushing it.